So a little bit of anxiety is normal, right? So if you have a test that you're studying for, if you have a speech that you have to give, if you have a job interview, you're worried. And that amount of worry is good. It helps you feel prepared. It helps you study. It helps you get ready for your talk or for your job interview. And that is actually functional. When we talk about a disorder, it's when it becomes unhelpful or dysfunctional, where it impacts your ability to get through the day-to-day events of your life. So some of the signs and symptoms are excessive thoughts, worries, and fears. So like I said, it has to be excessive, right? If your child is nervous about a test at school or a presentation, that is normal. But if it comes to the point where they stop going to school because they're that afraid or that scared, then it's a problem because it's impacting their function. Avoiding places, avoiding activities like stopping going to school, and they can also experience physical symptoms. So, your heart rate goes up, sweating, feeling like you're going to die. And imagine having these feelings, every single day or most days for a prolonged period of time. It is paralyzing. And so telling someone to, just get over it or move on is not helpful because it's a very real experience for that person. Another common mental health illness is depression. And depression is really an illness that affects someone's mood or the way they feel about themselves. So it is a sadness, but not just sadness, right? You're sad if your friend is sick, or you're sad if, you lose your job. All of that, again, is normal. So I'm trying to make the distinction, I hope, between what is normal and what is sort of above normal or abnormal. Depression is a persistent sadness that lasts for weeks to months. And in addition to the sadness, it's also feeling hopeless, feeling guilty, worthless, or anxious. So sadness, I think a lot of people think of depression as just sadness, but there's more to a depression than just feeling sad. People who have the actual illness of depression, they feel hopeless, right? So they don't see a future. They don't see things getting better. They don't see a way out of whatever situation they're in. They feel guilty. They feel guilty that others are worried about them. They feel guilty about their impact on others, and they feel worthless. Some of the other symptoms include they lose interest in activities. So someone who maybe enjoyed, meeting family and friends, you're not seeing that person around anymore. They withdraw from groups, and they are so sad that they have difficulty focusing on doing the things they need to do for their lives. And I think another common symptom is also changes in people's eating and sleeping. And that varies. So some people in their depression tend to eat a lot, others stop eating, and the same with sleep, either sleeping all the time, or there are also depressed people who don't sleep at all. And of course, at the very severe end of depression is thoughts of wanting to die. And so I think important to note that with all of these illnesses, it's a spectrum, right? People can have very mild anxiety or very severe anxiety. Same thing for depression. Another very common illness is also bipolar disorder. And bipolar disorder is an illness where people will experience periods of time of being depressed, and then other periods of time of being really high and elevated in their moods. So people who maybe for weeks have high energy, lots of ideas, exceedingly happy, more than seems normal for them. And in that period of being really high, they do things that are really unsafe. So they have great ideas, so they take all their money out of the bank, to start up a company. They give things away, And so those are activities that, once the high wears off, it can have a real impact on not just themselves, but their families. And so people with bipolar disorder oftentimes go from having really depressed moods to really, really high moods. And some of the high moods includes having racing thoughts, again, high energy, or being unrealistically happy, confident, or feeling really powerful. And they tend to stay up all night, not sleep, engage in things that could be really risky or dangerous, and things that their family or friends would say is not normal for them. Another illness, another common mental illness that we see is schizophrenia, which is a type of psychotic illness. And so I think a lot of people have different ideas of what schizophrenia is based on, mostly TV, and TV has really exaggerated ideas of what schizophrenia is. But really at the core of it, it is an illness that affects people so that they have a different experience of the world. So the way they see the world and the way they interact with the world is impaired. And they have difficulty determining what is reality and what is not. And so people suffering from schizophrenia are affected by delusions, which are, false beliefs or ideas that, they can't shift away from. So the feeling that someone is, after them or chasing them or listening to them. They suffer from hallucinations, which are sensory experiences. So, hearing voices that aren't really there. They could be by themselves and hearing someone talk to them. Seeing things that aren't there. And I think oftentimes we hear this, and I just want you to take a minute and think about wherever you are, if you're sitting there and you are hearing a voice constantly talking to you in your mind, how completely distracting that would be and how difficult that would be from engaging with other people. So you're trying to, pay attention to this conversation and pay attention to what I'm seeing, but really in your mind, you have another voice. And so just to have empathy and to understand what that experience would be like for someone, and how would you be able to work, go to school, and navigate the world when you're constantly having these extra experiences. So oftentimes people withdraw, right? Because the world and their experiences become too overly stimulating when you're trying to talk to another person in front of you, but you're hearing other voices as well. So, those are the more common types of mental illnesses that we see. Of course, there are other mental illnesses, right? At the extreme, spectrum of anxiety, there are obsessive compulsive disorders, right? Where people's anxieties really cause them to engage in compulsive behaviors. So checking things, washing their hands, doing the same thing over and over again, where people can spend hours trapped in their house and unable to leave because they have to check that they've locked the door. So part of it is the compulsive thoughts and then the actions that follow, which is needing to do something about it. Obviously, there are substance use disorders. So people who have a problem with, alcohol or drugs, to really soothe themselves to be able to get through life. And I'm sure it's not a secret to anyone that, in the midst of the pandemic, again, we've seen an increase in people using substances, right, as a way of coping with the fear and uncertainty of the pandemic, but also people who are bored and have been locked down at home and not having anything to do. And so using substances as a way of coping. And so I just wanted to shift to talk about, given the mental illnesses that I've just gone over, that there are treatments, right? There are very effective treatments. And again, I know that I have seen really and I'm sure a lot of people in the meetings have their own stories in terms of people or families who haven't sought help. When there is help that is available, that is effective and can ease people's suffering. So the first treatment that I'm going to talk about is counseling. And so there are different forms of counseling. And, you know, once the person enters treatment, it's basically assessing what their illness is and then deciding with their doctor or their therapist what treatment would best fit the illness. And so one form of counseling that is really effective, and that is basically sort of the gold standard, is cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's often used for different anxiety disorders or mood disorders, so depression. And it basically teaches the person how their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors work together. And so really part of the anxiety and depression are, again, the thoughts that people think about themselves, the way they think about other people. And so CBT really teaches people how to identify those thoughts, how to interrupt the unhelpful thoughts, and how to act. And it is first-line treatment for mild or moderate anxiety or depression. Again, remember I said that all of these illnesses are on a spectrum from very mild to very severe. And so if someone has very severe anxiety or depression and, you know, they're at the point of being completely hopeless, they're not eating, they're thinking about wanting to die, you're not going to do CBT because that person has really severe illness. And so again, it's matching the treatment to the severity of the illness. Other forms of treatment also include medications. Again, so if it is more moderate or severe, then using antidepressants, it's also first line to treat both anxiety and depression. And then there is antipsychotic or neuroleptic medications to treat schizophrenia. I think, you know, I've often had the experiences of people struggling to navigate, to get help, to figure out, you know, what to do for themselves or for their children. And I think it's really important to know that, especially living in Canada, we have, or even in the city, we have a lot of good resources through different organizations, and I'll share some of it at the end. It is challenging to navigate. I will be honest about that. It's challenging to navigate. It's challenging to navigate if you don't trust the healthcare system. I know a lot of us, a lot of Black people have very difficult experiences with the healthcare system. So there isn't always trust. And so people are reluctant to seek help. And that's a very real thing. And I think it's important to realize that, you know, we're all tax-paying citizens. And so the resources and the treatments that are funded by the government are for all of us. And so I think, you know, no one is going to care about you more than you're going to care about you. And so I think it's important for us to seek the help or to help the people who are not able to do that for themselves. Earlier, I mentioned suicide, and going a little bit more into detail, I think, you know, suicide is such a difficult topic to talk about. And I recognize that, you know, I don't know all the people on this call or in this meeting, but it wouldn't surprise me that if people have had experiences with families or friends or colleagues who've either attempted suicide or have completed suicide. And I think especially as Christians, it's a topic that is very difficult to navigate because we know what scripture says about suicide and we know how our community reacts to it. But I am a realist and a pragmatist, and I realize that, you know, when people are so hopeless and suffering, sometimes they cannot see out of that pain. And so it is really incumbent on all of us to then reach out to other people when we know they're suffering. And I think the hopelessness and the helplessness is the key point here. When someone gets to that place where they actually cannot see a point in living, that they may consider suicide. And so having other people in their life that they feel they can trust to reach out to is very, very important. Again, the most, at-risk groups are teens, right? Teens and young adults. And this piece of data has been consistent for many, many years. 15 to 24 is really the high-risk group. And it really has to do with that developmental stage of people's lives where they are sort of moving from, childhood or teenage into early adulthood and navigating all the things that come with it. And also adult males, adult men in their 50s. And so, thinking about the people in your life and the people who are suffering and finding a way to reach out to them. There is a lot of research that has been done on suicide for many decades. And there are people who are higher risk. So aside from age, other risk factors include people who have serious mental illness. If there's other people in your family who have attempted suicide or completed suicide. When someone has a major loss, so whether it's a loss of a husband or a wife or loss of a job, people who are isolated, who don't have other people in their life, and who have the means to complete it. There are also protective factors. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are a lot of people who suffer and have hard things in their life, but they don't kill themselves. And I think over and over again, the research indicates that spirituality or religious beliefs, whether it's having a relationship with God or a relationship with whatever other beliefs people have, it's really a protective factor because it grounds people to something deeper than themselves. And so it can be quite protective. Other factors also are people who are able to develop positive coping skills and having a sense of responsibility for others. So others who are dependent on you and feeling connectedness. And the social isolation and the social connectedness are important because those are the things that in the midst of COVID have really suffered. And so, we're not able to go to church physically and see each other. You're not able to, some people haven't seen their parents in a really long time, working from home. And so, as human beings, we do have a need for connectedness, right? To feel like we belong, that we're a part of something, that we matter to people. And so I think, the pandemic and the restrictions have really impacted that. And I think that's where we've seen people suffer the most. So I just very quickly went over all the different illnesses and treatments. And so thinking about, all the people who are listening and the impact that you can have after this talk, the impact, not just, in terms of your own lives, but the people in your lives, whether it's at home or at work or even in church. And so it's just very simple things that we can all do, which is, listening to the people in your lives who are suffering, right? I'm sure we all have ideas. You may not know for a fact who is suffering, but the people you haven't heard from, the people who you can't get a hold of, the people who in your heart are different, right? So giving your time and attention. Don't judge or minimize others' experiences. I know that, especially being Ghanaian and, our parents or other people having a hard life back home, when young people or kids have difficult days or start to talk about it, it's like, you don't know what we've been through. But what you've been through is different from what they're going through, right? I once had, a grade 3 child tell me that they had a really hard day at school. And I thought, hard day, grade 3, what could be so hard? But it doesn't matter. All that matters is that it was hard for them. And so the important thing again is to listen, and being mindful that some of the things we say can actually be harmful, right? If you dismiss someone, it can be harmful, and people are sensitive to that. So if you can't say anything helpful at all, then you can quietly pray for them and don't have to say anything harmful. The second thing that I'd encourage all of us to do is to ask, right? No two depressed people are the same. No two anxious people are the same. My challenges and my struggles are very different from the person next to me. And so what I need is different. And so to be helpful is to ask how you can help and follow through. And it's incredible how asking someone how you can help, that alone might be all they need, right? You may not actually have to do anything for them, but the fact that someone cared and someone asked is quite helpful. And, you know, think about yourself, right? When you've had a hard time or hard situation and, you know, someone asked how they can help, think about how that made you feel, and perhaps give that gift to someone else. If you are worried about suicide, it's okay to ask. I think we often do a lot of teaching to family members who are scared to ask. And there's this very false idea that if you ask someone, then you're putting an idea in their head and that, you know, they're going to do it. The research consistently states that is not true. Asking is helpful because it lets them know again that someone cares, and oftentimes people are looking for someone to ask them. The last thing I'd encourage us to do is actually act, right? If you're worried enough, you can reach out for help, or you can help that person to navigate the resources that is out there. So I think in the last few minutes, this was about 3 years ago. And so we all know how to get on a computer. We all know how to Google. There are a ton of resources out there, even more so in the midst of COVID. I know that CAMH and a lot of other places, the Canadian Mental Health Association, have a ton of resources. And there are also very specific help for, you know, Black communities, right? Given everything that's happened in terms of, you know, the awareness or recognition of racism, racial injustice, equity, all the things that have happened over the past year. I know that all those things have really added on to the burden for Black people. And so there's a lot of resources out there. So there's really is no excuse to not get help, not to reach out, realizing that it's not an easy thing to do. So, and I would say pay attention to your children, right? We are seeing a lot of children and young people who are suffering, and it looks differently for every child, right? Some become really withdrawn and quiet. Some become really oppositional and defiant. I don't know your kids, you know your kids, right? And you know when something is off and something is different. And it's really important to pick up on that because, you know, parents are suffering and children are also suffering. So I will bring it to an end and hopefully give some time for questions so that people can, you know, share the collective wisdom. I will endeavor to answer as many questions as I can, but there may be other people who also have, you know, expertise or advice or experiences who would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Mavis. Yamisha will be brave. Adofo, yes, Sister Achrecha Yemuni, and say, Sir, will be person will be sa question. I'm patcho, young costo na fame, young coyanim. Person will be to me after or chat about na fame. Yeah. Patcho, penny at least, a woman will be inside Naja. Wabwa ma yehu nipa me hu obi a wa ha. Patcho, be any question? Aha, you do your
Didn't Patcho me what question?
You won't patcho koso. If I talk also. Oh.
Pacho, no question.
And Pacho also.
That's it. I would have liked it too if Sister Mavis would have summarized some of her in our language, but it's okay. My question is, as Ghanaians, when we hear mental, so I think that is our main issue why we don't want to talk or ask for help. So how would she advise us, maybe in our language, how somebody would help address this? So when you say mental, it doesn't mean that the person is sad, depressed, doesn't mean but it's termed as mental health or mental illness. Is there a difference between the health and the illness? My question.
Yo, Medasi, thank you. So traditionally, no, yeah. So be abodam. Yeah, June say normally illness, yeah, schizophrenia, no. And no, now from my knowledge and from my experience, no. Enipa de share eka se nipa krono abodam. Say bia obia onena mabonten onhwe ne ho so yie ana say bia okasa kasa ana say obi feel say wonam ho a nipa krono bebe attack, right? Like growing up in Ghana, no, that's what is obi abodama. There is a fear associated with it. Yeah, the who be show mu say so usuru nipa no, and that's because you're dangerous and that's why you're violent. Meaning so agree, but media that's growing up no be abodam, that's the image you got. I think so will be abodam no. To my knowledge and my experience, no, it never really captured depression and I say anxiety, those kinds of mental illnesses, no. And to your question, no, how do we shift? And I say, how do we change our perspective from the not yenim growing up or what we were sort of taught growing up, no. And to answer your question, no, I don't think that there's an easy way, right? I think it is incumbent on all of us, a responsibility. So say yante Ghana biem, or to Canada, we are all of your Canadian things. And I think that it's on us, no. Similar to what we're learning together today, right now, and access you have to the internet and computer and all the things that WhatsApp, all the technology we have, no. Yeah, well, a lot of access to information. And so I think that obeying to me from outside, the right thing to do. I was saying who say your old ways of thinking, no, it no longer applies. And we can't continue in the old ways of thinking. And we grew up with as kids. You knew a guy in the community or on your neighbor in your street in Ghana. Everybody says this way wabadam. But nobody knew what kind of illness that person had. And I think that to answer your question, no, we ourselves have to change our old ways of thinking and our mindset, right? We have to renew our minds in the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge. Because again, there are a lot of people who are suffering in our community because we have that old thinking, say, hey, mami wedi neba we abodam. But you know nothing about that lady and her son, but you've decided, say you heard something at a grocery store and tea. Boy nabodam. And that family is suffering because they can't come to church because Obia decided so mabodam. And we exclude people, right? We say we're Christians and we want people to come to church and we want all these things, but there are things we do that exclude people. And so I don't know if it's answering your question, but my only thought is that we ourselves have yeah, well, access to information, and we have to do the education. And I commend you guys for even thinking about having this conversation here today as part of your meeting. And I think it's a first step. But I would hope say we talk here and do right now in moving forward in your lives, we're able to start that shift. I don't know if anyone else has, sorry, English. No, yeah, sometimes it's hard to explain some of these things in Chi. My apologies.
Yeah, that's it.
That's more question. Yeah. First off, no, says a lot of these things affect, is more predominant amongst the youth, as families, as church, what can we consciously do to help the youth, or to help them out of situation like this? And the second thing is, for nkwala na omo school no ni ade no, are there some maybe about boyen ameye home? Because like you said, obia different, but there may be some maybe a bit to me aboa ama so wakwala ko school krompo na oba na ana during the course of the activities no ni ade no betumi hu say ebia bibi and call right to the Akalano in order to help the kid out of that.
Okay, thank you. I'll answer your first question first, and I'll clarify. So, I think things like suicide affects the youth more, right? So they're high risk, not that it affects them more, they are high risk. But I will clarify that mental illness affects all of us. So whether you're youth, in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, so mental illness, it affects everybody. It affects parents, grandparents, and so just to clarify that, I think, the risk of suicide, the data shows that younger people are more likely, younger people and actually older men. So I think that, you can have, other parents, aunts, uncles who are also struggling with, depression and other things. In terms of your question about, the young people and children, the schools are getting better at having programs to help young people. And I think especially now, they're doing a lot around COVID and supporting kids. I think your question was, how do you help your child? Like, what are the things to look for, signs? I can say, there are common signs, right? So, Ebia Obano, they're getting bullied at school, for example, very common. They're getting bullied for any number of reasons. And so, or they're not doing well academically, or they feel like they don't have what other kids have. Some of the things to look for is basically anything that's changed, right? You know your child, you know how they normally are. And so if there's a change in the child, whatever that change may be, and recognize as said, change, a bit different for each kid. For example, there are a lot of kids who are social, active, talkative, all these things. And maybe they're being picked on, or maybe they're being bullied, or whatever is happening. And that, active, talkative, running around kid is all of a sudden withdrawn, right? Oh, if Fiaha was school, fine. They're not talking to you as much. They're not as active. They're not as wanting to see their friends. So that's a change for that child. There are other kids who are quiet and reserved, but maybe going through things and then start acting out. So, they're talking back. Maybe they get into fights at school. Maybe they're missing school. So I think that it's the best way I can explain is to think about what is different for that child. A kid who is engaged in church, coming to church all the time, doing things, and maybe again, they're more withdrawn. So I think the simplest answer is whatever that change is, and the teachers will pick it up because the teachers also spend a lot of time with your kids. So I think it's important as parents to be connected to your kids' teachers and to be involved in their school because they spend a lot of their time at school. And that's where you want to know when things are happening. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess the first part of the question, I wanted to know, say, even with the identified group, no, we're high risk, for as families and as church, is there anything that we can do consciously, like we can consciously do to help out so that some of these situations, could be avoided?
Are you talking about the high risk kids in terms of suicide, so that 15 to 24 age group?
Not only that, any group will be a high risk. Is there anything that we can consciously do?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that's there are things we can actively do because you want to be able to leave here and think about, if I know someone or think of someone, what can I do? Like the first thing to do is to talk to that person, right? Not talking to, if you have a relationship with them and you're comfortable with them, not talking, to someone else who maybe heard a story somewhere, but like, let's say, using myself as an example, if you knew me and you were concerned about me, I would hope that, you would come to me and say, oh, Mavis, I've noticed this, that, are you okay? Or some of the phrasing that you can use, because oftentimes people don't know what to say is, Mavis, I am worried about you. If someone came to me and told me they were worried about me, I would feel that that person cared about me, right? If you go to that person and you say, what's wrong with you? Or what's going on with you? Or why don't you come to church? Which is often the thing that we hear. Why don't you come to church? I haven't seen you in church. You don't know what I'm going through, right? You don't know why I'm not coming to church. But if you came to me and you said, Mavis, I'm worried about you. I haven't seen you at church in 6 months. The I'm worried about you communicates to me that you care, right? And so I think, simple things to answer your question more practically is, if you're able to go to that person, if you have a relationship with that person, going to them and say, I'm worried about you, and then saying what you've noticed that makes you worried. I'm worried about you because, your teachers are calling me. I'm worried because, you're not hanging out with your best friend, like whatever it is. And then that opens a conversation for that person to be able to talk to you. If that person isn't able to talk to you or isn't revealing, I think, gently staying on them, not pressuring, but gently saying, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, oh, Mavis, last week, I tried to talk to you. I just wanted to follow up. Are you okay? That communicates to me that when I blew you off last week, you're still thinking and you still care about me, right? And at the end of the day, we all want to feel cared for. And so I don't have some sort of like magic trick or pill, except to say that human beings want to feel cared for. And especially like young people or even adults, right? If someone is having a hard time, they lost their job, they can't provide for their kids, like our parents, right? Our parents struggle in lots of different ways. That works with parents as it does with kids, right? So my advice would be communicate your concern and your worry. Continue to stay in touch, and open the door saying, here's my number. If you need someone to talk to, please call me or please email me. I hope that's helpful.
Can I go?
Hello.
Madam Moderator, we are your sister Christina and Brother Jocelyn.
Brother Jocelyn, I'm here.
Okay, now in addition to Aunt Mavis, brought in there, I think we'll have to grow our communication scale. Whether you are a parent, whether you are a youth, whether you are software, whoever you are, that bit, being able to communicate to people and showing a sense of care, empathy, trying to get their hearts before we attempt to reason with them by getting their head is so very important. And the Mbesa can was say, they use the word conversation. I think it's quite critical. We should listen. Not only the sounds, but observe enough to be able to know, say, wanted to know for a while, on paid of his school bar person or shut the demo on person new kasa. We need to make time to be observant enough so that we're able to see we're able to have an idea what people may be going through. My last point, and is I want to suggest that we all practice what I call vulnerability. Let us all be open to each other. So be how that's what be crying out. I could be a was say at the sign you should be a little bit bold to kind of make an attempt to tell what is rough. Oftentimes Diana is raised as someone may make a cano obi a betty obi a tell so what we hear more and now be person born so be at that stereotypes at both ends majid say if you can deal with those stereotypes those of us who may need help and those of us who are able to provide the help whosoever may need, if we can deal with our stereotypes majid say no bet to me abwa and the other number they can't maybe see now maybe say trying to make the difference between mental health and illness. Can we say that mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual has the ability to cope with all the things he mentioned, stress and a little bit of depression. Those that may come away. If you have that mental ability to cope with animal now, you bet me for no mental health and now you have illness. Illness could be a medically diagnosable illness. It may result in impairment. There's a clinical impairment in say I don't know a illness. Meaning say if this difference sana minyan I want kasa no say are you okay there then I'm okay. Otherwise I could ask some more questions. But that's it.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. I will add, say you're absolutely right. So mental health, it's, a state of, like you said, well-being, being able to, cope and move through the challenges and difficulties of life, right? And mental health looks different for each of us. Illness is where there is, there are things that impact your ability to move through life. So that's when it becomes an illness, right? An illness is the anxiety or depression or whatever it is. It keeps you from being able to go to school, go to work, have relationships. It keeps you from doing the things that you want to do, right? And that's where, like the word you use is impairment. It impairs your ability to function. So similar to your diabetes, right? Similar to your hypertension, similar to when someone has had a stroke and needs to learn to walk again, there's an impairment in something. And so thinking about mental illness, the way that we think about, a lot of Black people have hypertension and diabetes and they take medications and you're supposed to watch your diet, right? And so having that illness means there's an impairment which needs corrective action.
Okay, so I'll come for a certificate. Thank you.
That's a software, that's a Sister Mavis. You remember Sister Christina, I call Oriana, Brother Jocelyn, Nafe, or Communicam for Tatuasho, now you're going to.
Thank you. My question is there, so obia our mental illness and a pochrono or the now you notice that there's something about that individual that does not, it's questionable. So sometimes you chalk it up by saying that, or this person is always like that. However, that person may have obsession at something that you're trying to tell the individual, you know what, don't be so obsessed about this, let it go, and then move on. And then you notice the person is unable to let it go. What advice would you give to that person working in your field? Thank you.
I think, going back to the same underlying issue of the approach and the intent, right? So in approaching that person, what is your intent? Before I come to you and say, Sister Christina, I've noticed this, what is, my intent? So my intent is that I care about you. My intent is that I've seen something that concerns me. So that's my intent. So then how do you put words to it? I think, like it was already mentioned, sometimes we may mean well, but the things we say do not communicate that we mean well. And the things we say can actually do harm. right? So I mean, if you know your Bible and you know James talks about the tongue, right? The tongue can be full of deadly evil, and learning to tame our tongues. And so thinking about, you may mean well in your heart, but how do you put words to that? So to answer your question, whatever it is that you've noticed, I think taking time to think about what you're going to say to that person. Oftentimes we just say something and then we regret it, or it doesn't come out right, and it creates a whole bunch of problems. So again, I often use the same approach to a lot of situations, which is, Sister Christina, I've noticed that, you do this thing over and over again. And, I'm worried that X, Y, and Z, or that I'm concerned X, Y, and Z. I think there's hardly a person who, if you communicate worry or concern, who may not tolerate it well. Now, some people may not, right? So some people may not want to hear you. But I think if you communicate that you're worried or that you're concerned, let that person know. At the end of the day, you can't make anyone do anything, right? So if you come to me and you say you're worried or concerned about me, and I shut you down, you can't make me do anything. But it leaves me to think about it. Even the people who you may think don't care, aren't paying attention, they may yell and scream. If you've said it with good intent and you've communicated concern, even if I yell at you, I scream, when you walk away, I'm still thinking about it, right? I'm thinking about you came to me and you communicated concern and worry. And even though I told you to get out of here or told you whatever, I'm still thinking about it. And so I think oftentimes when we reach out to people and they shut us down or they block us or they're rude, we feel like, oh, I'm not going to try again, or, oh, you're mad, you're hurt. But I don't know, think about the fact that that person may still be thinking about it. And so all I can say to you is finding a way to think about it and communicate to that person. And if there's an opportunity to gently follow up and gently communicate to them, and that's really all you can do, right? You can't push your way through, or you can't force someone if they're not ready.
Mavis, what I'm trying to get at is, would it be more helpful if the person disclose? It depends on the nature of the relationship that you have with that person. If the person disclose their state of mind, like a mental state, because I know individual who does not have that issue, but yet having a period of ups and downs, you can rationalize with that person. But the individual who actually has the disease, right?
So you're asking, would it be better if they disclosed?
Yes, not them not disclosing it. What are the proper way for you to approach that person in a way that even if they tell you to get out of here or whatever, you will not take offense to it? Like, what are the ways that you can approach that person that it's not from my logical sense or your logical sense, but being like someone that comes in the ward that has that illness, but it's unknown to someone else who's encountering with that individual. How would that person deal with that person without not being offended when the person acts up, quote unquote, act up, right? Yeah. Because to that person, they're being normal, but to the normal person, they're acting up. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, no, I see what you're trying to say. I think that, would it be helpful if I came to you and said, oh, I'm really struggling and, I've been depressed for 3 years and this is what's happening, so that you can then make sense of our interactions, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, if I came to you and I told you that and I disclosed that, then you would feel like, okay, how Mavis has been acting makes sense. But here's the thing, the responsibility is not on me to disclose. I don't have to tell anyone that I have depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, right? And so what you're asking for is for that person to help you make sense of your interactions or their life. That person may not be ready for it.
No,
Right.
what I'm asking is if the person does not disclose it, how do I make sense of the person's interaction towards me? Like if they come off standoffish?
I think here's my simple answer is you will not be able to. You will not be able to. And it's
My
unsatisfying.
things down. The next time I tell you, you will get out. You hear me?
You will not be able to, and I think you will have to be okay with that because I understand exactly what you're saying, right? You don't know what my illness is, you don't know my situation, but I'm acting towards you in a difficult or harsh way, or we have a difficult relationship. You suspect there's something wrong with me, but I'm not telling you what it is, and you want to know what it is. And if I don't tell you, you may not know, and you have to manage your own emotions. You have to manage how you relate to me, right? If I'm not giving you the information you need, because the onus is not on me to tell you what my diagnosis or what my illness is, unless I'm ready and unless I'm comfortable. A lot of people have diabetes and hypertension. They don't tell other people, right? They take their medications, they do whatever they do. You don't know other people's medical illnesses. And so the onus is not on that person to disclose to you unless they're ready that this is my struggle, this is my challenge. And so I understand your question. I think that you, as the person who is trying to get the information, you have to find a way to be okay and manage your relationship with that person without knowing. And I know it's not a satisfying answer, but you can't like force the truth out of someone. You can't the
No.
same way.
I think you're still missing my point. I'm not asking them to disclose. I'm just trying to say, how do I interact with that individual? Like being blindsided by their mental illness. If they're acting up standoffish, what am I supposed to do without feeling hurt? You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
you respond to them in a supportive way, right? Not knowing what is driving their quote unquote bad behavior or their difficult behavior, you respond to them in a supportive way. And if you can't do that, it's okay to distance yourself.
Okay.
Right? Like you don't have to put yourself in a situation where you feel like you're getting, berated or like whatever the relationship is.
Mhm.
And if you've tried and you're not getting anywhere, then it's okay to distance yourself. When that person is ready, right, to disclose or to have whatever, they can come to you. But I think as long as you engage in a supportive way, that's all that you can do.
Okay. Thank you.
Yo, me patch brother Jocelyn. Young Kwai.
Me that's it. So my question is mental illness genetic? If yes, is there any clinical way to break the cycle?
To break the cycle, can you explain a little bit more?
Like to break it, that it will extend it to the next generation.
Oh, okay.
Because back home, we usually hear that this home, they have a lot of mental people, especially even if they don't go and marry this house because they have mental issues. That's why I'm asking, is there a way with my break from this generation every day, or more active for more or more be a one exam?
Oh yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really hard question. So the other thing that I didn't talk about in the slides is that for a lot of Yaria Bebre Oha, there are genetic like components, right? So like breast cancer or other kinds of cancer, for example, right? Like if your mother had breast cancer, if your grandmother, like we all understand that. We know that as Black people, given our history, things like hypertension and diabetes, we have a high prevalence, right? And so the same thing is for mental illness, right? I think over the past few years, tries to help people understand mental illness as an illness, just like people with a high risk for stroke or diabetes or hypertension or even cancers, right? And so to answer your question of how do you break the cycle, I don't know that there is such a thing as breaking the cycle, only in terms of there are something like schizophrenia, for example, right? Yeah, well, certain kinds of mental illnesses where there is more of a genetic component. I think like most illnesses, I'll use diabetes and hypertension, for example, because it's easy and a lot of people have it. You know, if you have a family history of hypertension or diabetes, your doctor will ask you, right? All your mothers, your fathers, all these people, they've had diabetes and hypertension. You are at risk for it because it runs in your family. So if I have, you know, a high risk and genetic sort of affinity for it, it doesn't mean that I'm going to get diabetes or hypertension. It means that there are things I can do in my environment and in my life and in the foods I eat and my exercise and all those things that can help me not get it. So I think it's the same thinking for mental illness. If you're genetically predisposed to it, say, well, family, and I say, well, it doesn't automatically mean, say, you're going to get it. But when you're asking about breaking the cycle, there are things that you can do, right? Things like managing your stress, things like working on your actual mental health, right? So how do you react to situations? How do you react to stress? I showed that slide about protective factors, right? So protective factors like, being rooted and grounded in something, feeling connected, having social groups, having work that's important. So all of those protective factors are things that we can work on, similar to, the diabetic watching their sugar and their carb intake, your exercise, all of those things. So that's really the best way I can answer your question, is that there's nothing we can do about your genes, right? If something has run in your family for years and years, like there's nothing anyone can do about it. What you can do about is the other things, the protective factors, in learning coping skills, right? How do you cope with difficult situations? How do you cope with difficult people? How do you react under stress? What do you do when things aren't going well? So you can build and learn those things to help be more protective. I don't know if that answers your question.
That
Yo, yeah, that's it, brother Jocelyn. You be fine. Open your comfort. Na fe no ya share chat no questions bi ho na ya hwe. Nti open ni man nko.
Yo, Midasi. And thank you so much, Sister Mavis. Say Nyamina Mosu Acheche. I just want to add, I know when you were talking about how we could approach people and how we could get to know and be supportive. We say, if somebody come to you and say that I care, if somebody come and say that I'm worried about you or I'm concerned about you, I just want to add, dear, I just want to add, say we can also start by saying, Sister, maybe for instance, with your example, like I care about you. So we can start from there, especially with the young people. You can start by saying, I care about you. And then we can continue with whatever that we want to say. And I also want to say that by also saying, I'm thinking about you, would also be a phrase that we can also start. And I want to just affirm or support what you say, that by having relationship with them, then you can have, you'll be able to get to know what's going on. And I also want to say, not sister Bibisa question, and you can say, after what try BBR, the person is not responding, you can just, go away and manage your own emotion. I just want to add that at that point, and our spirituality and our faith also helps. And if that's the case, then if on responding, all true off now on to say background on casta, then you go away and be praying. Isaiah 54:13, for instance, says that, how the Lord will teach your sons and great will be their peace. And it's let's just say that spirituality and sister body, that will be part will be timiaye amani pakrono. And my question is, sister, I can say there are tons of information on the internet, which is true. Now, what about our young people who are self-diagnosing themselves because of the availability of all this information to them? How can we help? Because sometimes they diagnose themselves. It may be close to us, but you can be at work and then a child is telling you, say, and they can find all this information on the internet. How can we manage that if, say, we get into contact with such young people?
Okay, thank you. Self-diagnosing, that is, I guess, the good and the bad of the internet and having so much information available. My first thought, and what we tell patients and families all the time, is finding reputable organizations, right? So not like Wikipedia or not someone's chat room, but when you go into Google and you Google whatever, depression or whatnot, looking for organizations that are reputable. So organizations that are, established, that have research behind them. And depending on where you live, there's usually a mental health association or organization for each area that you live in. And even any hospital, right? Most hospitals will have psychiatric or mental health resources online. And that those are developed by those organizations and research groups. So that is really easy advice in terms of, Canadian or provincial or even local organizations that have information on the websites. Self-diagnosing, people do it for a whole bunch of medical and psychiatric illnesses. You wake up with a rash or a thing, you Google it, and it tells you a whole bunch of random things, some good, some not so good. I think if your child, or again, I want to stress that though I've spoken about children and youth, adults and parents are not excluded from this, right? So I just want to be clear on that mental illness and psychiatric illness affects everyone. I think, if your child or a young person comes and they've self-diagnosed, again, I think the same principles apply. It's what is it that's caused them to do this and to feel like they need to self-diagnose? Something's driven them to that, right? So if they're Googling or they're on the internet and they're finding information and they come to you and they say, oh, I think I have anxiety, or I think I have schizophrenia, or I think I'm bipolar. Again, it's having a dialogue and having a conversation instead of saying, it's having a conversation, a dialogue to say, okay, help me to understand what's going on that you think you have this, right? What's going on that you went on the internet to look at this? Because there's something that's driving them to seek that information and to look into that. So again, the issue of having a conversation is always important for everything, because they are coming to you saying that, they've Googled or they've diagnosed. They're opening the door for conversation, right? They're opening the door for dialogue. Or if you happen to find things that they've printed on the kitchen table or on the dinner table around whatever, that's an invitation for dialogue. It's an invitation for you to have a conversation with that person to say, oh, I noticed so-and-so, tell me more about it. Help me to understand what's going on. What's happening that you think you have, depression or anxiety, and then starting that conversation to then figure out, if they actually need to see a professional, because Google and the internet can only take you so far. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes. Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you.
Okay. Sister Mavis, maybe you could write these down. We have 3 questions from the same person in the chat. I'm going to read them, and maybe you could pick up the questions and you answer the 3 together if possible. Like,
oh, I can see them. Is it from Bernice?
Okay, good. That's right. So please, he said, I have 3 questions.
I have 3 questions. Number 1, can you please clarify again what you refer to as disturbed thinking? So the disturbed thinking, I think I mentioned it in several different sort of illnesses. So anxiety and depression, disturbed thinking can show up in terms of negative thoughts. So negative thoughts that we have about ourselves: I'm not good enough, I'm useless, I'm worthless, nobody likes me, I can't do anything right. See, I made a mistake. See, they're laughing at me. So these are things that you can think about yourself that impact the way you see the world and the way you interact with the world, right? So people with depression, we often see what we call negative self-talk. So I can be sitting here and thinking, "Wow, I'm good for nothing. I made a mistake. I can't even do this right. They're all laughing at me." Those are negative thoughts that over a period of like weeks to months can become overwhelming and can be part of that depressive episode or depressive mood, right? And it's when someone is having like, once in a while, we all have those thoughts about ourselves, right? Oh, I look so bad. I'm not good at this. So-and-so doesn't like me. See, my friend doesn't call me anymore. Like, we all have those thoughts. But when it becomes persistent and predominant, and that's all we think about, then the potential to really affect our moods and our thinking is there. Anxious thoughts. So anxious thoughts are, oh, I'm gonna get hit by a car. If I leave the house, I'm gonna get hit by a car. It's thinking about things or persistent worries that really don't go away, that affect or interfere with our life. In an illness like schizophrenia, disturbed thinking is really our thinking that is not clear or disorganized. So for example, what I talked about, delusional beliefs, right? Thoughts like, I'm sitting here in the apartment right now and I'm convinced that, the light is really a microphone and that everything I'm doing, someone can hear or see me, right? So those are things that I'm thinking that are not based in reality, that can affect my life and my function. So I hope that answers that question in terms of what's disturbed thinking. The second question says, referring to ourselves, not what we notice about others. Sorry, I don't understand that. Referring to ourselves.
We're not talking about others, we're talking about ourselves.
Okay, are there some indications that I as an individual, if possible, can use to check ourselves that perhaps we're sliding from general stress or sadness into clinical depression or a state that professional help is needed? Okay, so this is an excellent question as well. So if I'm looking at myself and I'm not thinking about friends or families or other people, what can I do or look at in my own life to sort of do a stress check to see if I need clinical help? Again, I will first start by saying that you know yourself best, right? And so you are going to be the best judge of what is different about you. So thinking about, how you normally cope with things, right? If you're in a situations where oftentimes some patients come in and they're sick or they have a diagnosis and they have a reaction to it. Let's say someone gets diagnosed with cancer. A question that I'll often ask is, how do you normally cope? And are you coping as you would expect, right? So you've been through other hard things in your life. You've been through other difficult things in your life. You know how you coped with those situations. You know how you dealt with, failing a class, getting a bad grade, when your friend didn't talk to you, when somebody broke up with you, when you got in a fight with your parents, when your children did whatever. You know how you cope through all those things. So looking at yourself right now, are you coping the way that you normally would cope? Or do you feel like your coping right now is impaired? Do you find yourself struggling to deal with whatever the situation is, whereas normally you'd be able to deal with it better? So I think that would be the first question, right? Looking at, your patterns of behavior and the way you are and the way you deal with things. How are you doing right now in terms of dealing with what that situation is? And, it's a good, I guess, meter to judge whether or not you're sliding from general stress or sadness into clinical depression, because other people may be noticing it. So when other people are commenting things to you, that's important to take note. When you yourself know that you're not able to do the things you were previously able to do, right? So maybe you've been sad for periods of time in the past, you've been anxious, but you were able to like get up in the morning, take a shower, go to work, go to school, call people, return phone calls. You were able to do all of those things, but you're noticing that you're not able to do some of those things anymore. I think those are the indicators and the markers for looking at whether or not you need help. So I will speak to the third question. Oh, that's a long one. It says question for everyone. So I guess other thoughts are also welcome. Some approach all illnesses as being from the devil. So church faith intervention is the first tool, and for some, the only tool. That going to these psychiatrists or medical professionals could be a show of little or denying your faith and not believing enough in God. Whether it is deciding to go or not to a prayer camp or prayer meetings, crusades, some of that thinking may still be in our subconscious. How do we merge this knowledge of medical science regarding mental illness and all the support techniques that we're discussing with our Christian faith and belief? So, I mean, I can share my thoughts on this question. It's a question that could take another hour to discuss because different people have different perspectives. I will share my thoughts, and then I would invite, I guess, the pastor and other people who have thoughts on it. Yeah, so I think we know people who have illnesses, again, whether it's medical illnesses or psychiatric illnesses, who, their perspective is praying about it, fasting, doing all those things, and not seeking medical help. As you can probably tell, I also think that, God has provided science and people who are trained in specific illnesses to be able to help. And so I think we can do ourselves a disservice by not reaching out and seeking help. I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with prayer. I believe in prayer, and I believe that, the God who made you knows how to heal you. And God has also made other people with different gifts and skills and talents to be able to help, right? Just like lots of people in the church have different talents, and all those people come together to make the church what it is. I also think that, other medical professionals have skills and talents and gifts. And so I think it's both, not one or the other. So that is my short answer to that. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
Yo, yeah, that's the bebre, Sister Mavis. Yo, so for Pacho, who will be because of Sonia Sadia, announcement, Mother Roman.
Pacho, as of now, I'm in the Joshua and may come there, Ariana.
Yo,
and Benin for I could have at the account.
Yo,
the machine I say free, Sister Mavis last. I was avoiding can mind just say. As Methodist, and your man night, a friend of Wesleyan quadrilaterals, and their boy him, and our practice of faith, and all that goes with it. Kind of Yamia Samaka Bible or Semonti Ediana, a Canada, abandoned Namon Fana Haha, no, any day, and the Bible directs us to seek medical help and critical attention when there's a need. Because Yankopon no or the God of justification is a God of justice, if you like. The God who asks us to walk in faith is the God that says that we are God's workmanship, created for every good work. And the idea be about I'm sure God will want you to consider. And scripture is crucial. It also means a tradition near the camp for mood edi and Nimkano. I think it was in the 16th century. There was something they call black plague, similar to COVID. Na Sabra na Martin Luther. It besides or bad day. Also, my bomb pie, a year made the Manyan Sabatonia doctors ne as a share for no air cannon. And it's branch the force being balanced and a holistic approach to life is so crucial. I also me and is a fact say. Reason I do not Yakopon de Amono, but the mouse of fire day. As my a beginning near when we have information and knowledge to be able to help us, it is not enough to want to assume say be a your bonsam, a science of bonsam, ɛhɔ na wɔhwɛ Yesu Kristo kora de baby ɔsa yadeɛ no mokaya in some occasions no de entefie saliva no de fafra no tie and no de papa no any so in some cases he asked them go and wash in the water. In some cases he asked them to get into the water. In some cases he only prayed for them. In some cases na obano atiapo. So there's a whole nuances, if you like, as to how God uses many of the facilities of healing around us to heal us. Near day check a wow experience actually saying. I'm saying I always say because it is critical for us to see that almost every trouble around us has a spiritual dimension. In fact, Nimpa Atitia basically can be looked at in light of that theological, if you like, a balance. All of these medical, or mental health, illness, coccidiosis, all of them as a result of sin. So when we're able to deal with sin and put it at where it ought to be, as a entire poor crana, or to me, assign idea, Emma Yedimo. And then I'm count in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, and Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature. Yesu onyini ewo samu any stature minim nefante but stature he grew in stature and he had favor with God and with men. I want to call it, if you like, a holistic growth. What kind a John or Trafford? I pray for you, beloved, that it will be well with your body, even as your soul prospers. So God believes in our health. Philippians chapter 4. Verse 4 through to 19. Rejoice again, I say, rejoice. God will say, and now whatever is pure, whatever is true, whatever is powerful, whatever is of good report, whatever is noble, think about these things. And they say, yeah, I tell you, we're able to overcome all of these mental stuff because many of them know will have to start from sound to certain kind of a little anxiety, little depression, little stress. You don't take care of it. You have no time for exercise. You have no time to sleep well. You don't even believe in Sabbath. You don't rest. Little drops of water eventually becomes a mighty ocean. Get to a point you are not able to get what you need to get from God's fullest blessings. John chapter 10:10. It says, I pray that you have life and have it in abundance. I think that life of abundance includes mental health. But media besiana and penny for a could them be at us with us.
For kakra yebe kanu ina sofu du gan kanina media no wafa be wakanina nti menehwe ka nti cardinal be dase
you papa ye dase if I cho sofu Bernard beka bibiana
so kwasira pan kakra
ayo ene ye de nyame ase sister Mavis nyame hira wo bebre Why dear pa?
Papa was so. Papa become baby kakra. Papa is super also.
Hey,
Papa
super.
the second.
Aye. Papa, you care what kakra the uncle.
So mbacho wa mayo oko wenu wa mai. Yena ya also. Papa mai.
Yo.
Dimpacho munkoso.
Yo.
Yeah, that's it. Yo, Sister Mavis, sale ya kano. Nyame sha obebre. Hwe, nyame wonfa wonfiri adomu enko adomu. Oma wonyansa wo. Na hwe bi ka ho. Na ya wasa be kyekye yim biom. Nti nyame sha obebre. Adofo baby edri, ye beti announcement na fe no. Ya hwe de to aso.
Anti je mpacho yo.
Mpacho kasa.
Na sister, maybe so say, na the was screen no soon into na ye hu n'anim no.
Okay.
Ka we de odi n'anim ba yanka na ye hia no kwan so a. Me say hello.
Oh, it's me aba.
Say the video no.
Emma.
Yeah, there was no video attached to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we are merchants. Won't try photo merchant. Why?
That's it.
Because on our here or Toronto and or Montreal. Ediana will be per se our year program be of this sort now or tone suffering.
Toronto.
That's it.
Now, o contact me. Now, one money $250,000. Now, for my releasing.
So, Papa, you won't get them crowd.
I got Toronto. And you start this year. Yeah, now who you will be? Yeah, baby, I bear come. And I want to give her baby, I don't know why.
Okay, that's it. I think it's an excellent presentation.
Yes.
Time factor in KB and Kobe to me, I can't hear my baby. I recommend this various societies can organize themselves now. You have to be at this house now. I will work as a party at an ACP.
Good. Uncle Stuart, then why?
I think it's a steward in her and assistant, so I busy currently my announcements. Me pamucho nyami adum enwumre yesan so ahia bi. We are meeting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Mountain, Calgary and Edmonton 5, and Vancouver 4 p.m. Pamucho yenyina yehia bi. Yamrantem because we want to just spend 2 hours. And sorry for the pay. See, go over the time. Nyami adum so ochina Asorbe started 11 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 9 a.m. for Edmonton and Calgary, and Vancouver 8 a.m. Yes, now Ochina is going to be a communion service as well. So I'm prepared for communion. Ready for that. Ochina, sorry, so attire no be the 170th anniversary at the blue cloth no, and then you be say wouldn't be a sorry cloth to be a will be no. You can just put it on. As we continue our journey with evangelism, no, nyame adom ochina ye be gigi bibi kakra. Na so because we want to evangelize, want to reach out to as many people as possible. Inti si betumi ayesa chisi na yeboa. Inti yamomode na ochina yam prepare na yamboa kakra bi betumi bia na yamfa mboa na yamfa implant sorry ya betumi. Ochina nyame adoma for Toronto Ghana Methodist. Kwa afo ni praise team fo nyina no. Yesese mubakwa sorry demo. Sorry ma so kakra yibetumi akono. I think say number no total no including also for any praise team kwa for ni nyina they are looking at 60 inti dodo yibetumi akọ ayenko brosa number no we do it there inti later just near the nyina be ye free ho ya your program so ye be Zoom no so we're going to do our part from the Zoom prayers no near there no mo me kai say time down. I think we are looking at a maximum of 5 minutes for Umwa Yababom Payano. Inti Yamamodi making sure say you be the time and also Amayanche Bebre war program. So I think it's a announcement no every year no. Me pacho say bibi ho so for na wodi atuaso. Nyame say nyina.
Yo, kakra ye de eka won say ye pon a one will be pray role na ochina. We believe in Bible, be kind Bible. Can we fidie so sima enumpe na ye no wundi nkomo kakra. Efe kakra be kan see yesre catechus and see was some more the more asoma ne enkasa. Whatever they are doing, they should put a stop to it. Niye namra niye meye ye can be to say and ye COVID in ye call face to face. Ka wunti ufie. Ndi ebesre we fine opportunity aba ye boa ye social year bay enti no mesre o ma ye ne ye ma no nkasa na omomra na ebinom obi ne mekasa fi ba bi me mbokro ne di ozo dem say anape ye nya hwe you 3 pm ne be start nam se da bi one check wo ayino flyer na ba no announcement o de ba no wantie enti mesre o ma ye mfrefre mo fa to mo platform no say a program e koso enra kasa yete emuham and then a yati anape emuham and have talking su edimu adwumre ye betie bi o kire na ye be klamase bibia enti womun kachiye womomra ni na mbom ne yenye emoa na yenje nyame nsem nhira enti ye pompe workers ochina womun ka moma yiso maye na ye no wondi nkomo 5 minutes be pe 7 on the dot me start adwumre de nto ma yen hye nenso yada mase
yo eda nyame ase anka Chris and the Methodist hymn 199 first and last na fe for Dugan abo paye na so for apia Israel se papa inyamaye ntino.
Ojo oma ye mompa oboafo no korofo nam Jesus do amanyan siasabi onensi ye da hokodruba wanyum fro abeja nda singa uzenda ya da wase adom na inshallah ho za pensa zene bodu ya da wase wase mo ba ya tia kaka hen the need for us to consider bringing us up to you for you to revive us. Ama ye that revival is always preceded with prayer.
Spirit, help us pray. That woman who is looking for solution to her problem, Father, help her pray. And to that man who has wept throughout the night, looking for a breakthrough, Lord, through these hymns, help him pray. To that gentleman who has been praying, God, speedily answer him. That young lady who is looking unto Zion for help, Lord, help her pray in Jesus' name.
Hey, everybody, somebody, let me see you, let's go. People, oh yeah, yeah.